Tom jolted awake to the deafening silence. Something was wrong. Usually, the rhythmic hum of his farm's irrigation system was the first sound that greeted him each morning. But that day, the steady pulse was missing, replaced instead by an unsettling quiet that made his heart race. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he stepped out onto the porch of his sprawling farm, only to be confronted by an astonishing sight: a freshly paved road slicing right through his fields, disappearing into the distance. There were no warning signs, no prior notice, just a broad, smooth asphalt ribbon cutting across the land he'd nurtured for decades. For Tom, a lifelong farmer and proud steward of his inherited acreage, this was not merely an inconvenience. It was a direct affront, a violation of his property rights by an outside authority that had no right to alter his land without permission. As the shock began to give way to simmering anger, he recalled the day when a formal letter arrived from the Homeowners Association, HOA, of the upscale Crescent Meadows community bordering his farm. The letter stated in curt, bureaucratic language that a new road had been approved to improve connectivity for the neighborhood. Tom knew his farm was not part of any planned community infrastructure, and yet there it was, a road now laid on his property. Within moments, Tom's mind raced with possibilities. He recalled the countless fines and intrusive inspections that had plagued local farmers from the HOA's overreaching policies. But this time, it wasn't about a stray fence or an out-of-place sign. It was about the very heart of his livelihood. Determined not to stand idly by while his legacy was being bulldozed, both literally and figuratively, Tom resolved to fight back. He would show the HOA that his land was his own, that every inch of it was protected by more than just legal documents, but by his hard-won experience and unyielding spirit. And so, as the last remnants of dawn painted the sky, Tom began to plan his counterattack, a strategy that would not only reclaim his property, but also serve as a bold, public statement against arbitrary bureaucratic overreach. Today, the road would be a symbol not of progress, but of resistance. Today, Tom's farm and its heritage would fight back. Tom's farm, known as Willow Bend Acres, had been in his family for generations. Nestled on the outskirts of the prestigious Crescent Meadows community, his land stretched over 300 rugged acres of farmland and woodland. Willow Bend Acres was a living tapestry of nature and hard work, a place where rows of corn swayed in the summer breeze, orchards of apple trees glistened with dew in the early morning, and the quiet dignity of rural life reigned supreme. The farm was Tom's pride and joy. Every furrow in the field, every tree planted by his grandfather, told a story of perseverance and deep-rooted connection to the land. Over the years, Tom had modernized parts of the farm, installing state-of-the-art irrigation systems and even experimenting with renewable energy on a modest scale. Yet he maintained the traditional spirit that had defined his family for decades. In stark contrast to Willow Bend Acres was the meticulously managed suburban enclave of Crescent Meadows. This gated community, with its pristine lawns, uniformly designed houses, and an unwavering dedication to order, was governed by a rigid homeowners association. The HOA prided itself on maintaining an image of perfection. Every curb, every tree, every road was planned and approved. To the residents of Crescent Meadows, deviation was not an option. Conformity was the law. At the heart of the HOA's administration was Karen Miller, widely known as HOA Karen. In her late 40s, always impeccably dressed in tailored business attire and armed with a clipboard and smartphone, Karen was the self-appointed enforcer of Crescent Meadows' strict guidelines. She patrolled the neighborhood with an almost militant determination, ready to fine or reprimand anyone whose property failed to meet her exacting standards. To Karen, every bit of nonconformity was a threat to the community's carefully crafted image, and she took it upon herself to correct even the smallest deviations. While many residents of Crescent Meadows quietly complied with the HOA's rules out of fear of fines, Tom had always been a maverick. Growing up on the farm had taught him that life was unpredictable and that true progress often came from embracing change rather than clinging to outdated ideals. His farm was his sanctuary, a place where he could experiment, innovate, and express himself freely. He never intended to be part of the cookie-cutter world of suburban conformity, and his independent spirit often put him at odds with the HOA's rigid mandates. The tension between the two worlds had simmered for years. The residents of Crescent Meadows would often gossip about the wild farmer on the outskirts, whose property was as untamed as his spirit. To them, Willow Bend Acres was an eyesore, a relic of a bygone era that clashed with their polished image. Karen Miller, in particular, had taken an almost personal interest in ensuring that every resident adhered to the community's aesthetic norms. And when she discovered that Tom's farm, with its sprawling fields and rustic charm, bordered Crescent Meadows, she saw an opportunity to extend her influence. The tipping point came with the shocking discovery of the new road, a road that the HOA had unilaterally built on Tom's land without his consent. For Tom, the road was not only a physical intrusion, it was a violation of his rights, a reminder that the forces of conformity were encroaching on everything he held dear. It was in that moment that Tom realized he had to fight back not just for himself, but for every independent spirit in the community. Tom's plan was audacious. If the HOA could force its way onto his property, then he would use their own tactics against them. The road, which was meant to symbolize progress and connectivity, would become a rallying point for resistance. Tom would turn the tables and show the HOA that his land, his legacy, was not for the taking. The conflict began in earnest the day Tom first discovered the road. Early that morning, as he made his way to check the irrigation system, he found a road stretching across his fields like an unwelcome scar. The asphalt was fresh, the edges crisp and unyielding, a stark contrast to the natural, uneven terrain of Willow Bend Acres. Tom's initial shock quickly gave way to fury. How dare the HOA, without any notice or discussion, build a road on his property? Determined to gather evidence, Tom immediately pulled up security footage from his newly upgraded cameras. The footage revealed a series of covert operations carried out under the cover of darkness. Workers in hard hats and reflective vests had been seen hauling heavy machinery and paving materials across his fields. There were no markings or approvals, just the relentless march of construction that was stripping away the character of his land. With each new frame, Tom's resolve hardened. This wasn't a mere misunderstanding or a clerical error. It was a deliberate encroachment. The HOA had taken it upon themselves to reshape his property in the name of community improvement, and they had done so without even consulting him. The violation was personal, and it felt like an affront not only to his property rights, but to the very legacy of his family. Tom knew that he couldn't let this stand. He began compiling every scrap of evidence: time-stamped video clips, photographs of the freshly laid asphalt, and even digital record from local construction companies that hinted at the unauthorized project. He also reached out to a few trusted neighbors in Crescent Meadows who had long expressed concerns about the HOA's overreach. Their support was immediate. Many had their own stories of arbitrary fines and invasive regulations. Together, they formed a coalition of dissent, united by the belief that property rights and individual expression were sacrosanct. As the evidence mounted, Tom decided that a mere complaint to the HOA board would not suffice. He needed to send a message, loud and clear, that his land was not up for grabs. The digital conversations on community forums were already buzzing with the hashtag #MyLandMyRules, and Tom's determination grew with every supportive comment. The thought of the HOA board, and especially of Karen Miller, casually discussing the fate of his land in some sterile meeting filled him with indignation. He couldn't allow them to win. In the days that followed, Tom began preparing his counterstrike. He sought legal counsel to review his property rights and to confirm that the unauthorized road construction was a blatant violation of state and local laws. The legal experts assured him that as the rightful owner, he had every right to challenge the construction and demand its removal. This legal backing, coupled with the digital evidence he had amassed, gave Tom the confidence to take a stand. Fueled by both anger and a fierce sense of justice, Tom organized a town hall meeting with like-minded neighbors. In that gathering, residents shared their own grievances about the HOA's overbearing tactics. Stories of fines for minor infractions and of personal property being overstepped were recounted in hushed, impassioned tones. The coalition's message was clear: no one should have their land transformed without their consent. But Tom's plan wasn't limited to legal challenges and community meetings. He knew that the ultimate weapon in his arsenal was public opinion. He began to document every step of his investigation and every moment of the unauthorized construction on his property. He posted daily updates on the community forum, sharing photos, videos, and detailed accounts of what was happening. His posts were laced with a defiant energy that quickly resonated with other residents. Hashtags like hashtag Stop the Road and hashtag Property Rights Now began trending, and soon his digital dossier became a rallying cry against the HOA's overreach. Karen Miller, for her part, remained unyielding in her belief that the road was a necessary improvement for the community. In interviews with local media, she argued that the new road would boost property values and enhance connectivity for Crescent Meadows. But her claims were met with derision online and with skeptical looks at town meetings. The evidence was clear. The road had been built without proper authorization, and it was a direct infringement on Tom's property rights. The tension in the community grew palpable, and as the day for the final public hearing approached, the atmosphere in Crescent Meadows was charged with anticipation. Tom's digital dossier, combined with the collective outrage of the residents, had set the stage for a showdown that would force the HOA board to confront the abuse of power. The battle lines were drawn. On one side stood the oppressive force of arbitrary rule enforcement. On the other, the determined voices of property owners fighting for their rights. In the wake of Tom's exposé, the story of the unauthorized road spread like wildfire throughout Crescent Meadows. Social media exploded with posts, memes, and hashtags that decried the HOA's overreach. Videos of the freshly paved road, with its stark contrast to the natural contours of Willow Bend Acres, were shared hundreds of times. Hashtags like hashtag Stop the Road, hashtag My Lamba Rules, and hashtag Property Rights Now trended locally, and the digital community's support for Tom's cause grew exponentially. Local news stations quickly picked up the story. Reporters drove past the boundary of Willow Bend Acres, capturing aerial shots of the road slicing through the fields, juxtaposed against the idyllic, unaltered landscape beyond. In interviews with bewildered residents, one anchor stated, "This isn't just about a road. It's about the very right of a landowner to control his own property." The people of Crescent Meadows are clearly fed up with arbitrary decisions by the HOA. The coverage painted a vivid picture of a community at a crossroads, a community forced to choose between conformity and individual freedom. Within the HOA board, the response was mixed and fraught with tension. Emergency meetings were held in hushed, closed-door sessions, and leaked minutes revealed a growing schism among the board members. Some long-standing members, traditionally loyal to Karen Miller's strict enforcement, began to question whether her actions were truly in the community's best interest. We must remember that every property owner has rights, and no one should have their land taken over without consent. One board member was quoted as saying in a leaked memo. Others argued that maintaining uniformity was paramount. But as the digital evidence of the unauthorized road continued to pour in, it became clear that the board's unity was crumbling. Tom, meanwhile, continued to galvanize support online. He posted daily updates on community forums and social media, sharing timestamp photos and video clips that documented every inch of the illicit road construction. His detailed blog entries, which explained the legal and historical significance of property rights, resonated deeply with residents who had long felt marginalized by the HOA's rigid policies. "This is our land, our heritage," one post read, "and we will not stand by while bureaucrats decide what it should look like." The online movement swelled, and petitions demanding that the HOA board reverse the decision and dismantle the road gathered thousands of signatures. Local influencers and bloggers joined the conversation, posting op-eds that lambasted the HOA's overreach and praised Tom for standing up against injustice. Videos emerged of impassioned speeches at community gatherings where residents recounted years of grievances, fines for minor infractions, invasive inspections, and a constant pressure to conform. Every shared story added fuel to the growing fire of resistance. Karen Miller, who had long been the face of strict enforcement, found herself under intense scrutiny. In interviews with local media, she tried to defend the road as a necessary improvement for the community, a move that would supposedly increase property values and improve connectivity. But her arguments were quickly undermined by the overwhelming digital evidence. The stark images of the road cutting through Willow Bend Acres, combined with testimonies from angry landowners, painted a different picture, a picture of unilateral power and blatant disregard for individual rights. As the tension escalated, the HOA board announced that a final public hearing would be held to address the controversy and decide the fate of the unauthorized road. The announcement sent shockwaves through Crescent Meadows. In the days leading up to the hearing, neighborhood meetings and community forums buzzed with anticipation. Residents prepared signs and rallied their voices, determined to see justice done. Tom's digital dossier was shared widely, and every hashtag and comment reinforced the message that property rights were not negotiable. On the morning of the hearing, the community center was packed to capacity. Neighbors from across Crescent Meadows filed in, smartphones at the ready, as they awaited the board's decision. The atmosphere was electric, a mixture of anger, hope, and an unwavering resolve to reclaim their rights. Every whispered conversation, every nod of solidarity underscored the fact that this was more than just about one unauthorized road. It was a defining moment for the entire community. The final hours before the hearing were a whirlwind of activity. Digital petitions soared in numbers, and local news crews captured the palpable tension outside the community center. Residents discussed the implications of the HOA's actions and debated the future of individual freedom in a community that had long prided itself on conformity. The stakes were clear. Either the board would stand by its oppressive policies, or would be forced to embrace a new era where property owners could dictate the destiny of their own land. As the final public hearing drew near, the sense of inevitability grew. The community's collective voice, amplified by thousands of digital posts and signatures, left no doubt that change was not only necessary, it was imminent. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation that would force the HOA board to either validate the rights of its residents or crumble under the weight of its own outdated mandates. The decisive moment arrived on a crisp morning at the Cedar Crest Community Center, where the final public hearing was being held. The boardroom was filled with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and a sea of determined residents, all gathered to witness the culmination of a months-long battle for property rights in Crescent Meadows. With a calm yet unwavering presence, Councilwoman Rebecca Lawson stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the collective resolve of a community that had grown tired of arbitrary rule enforcement. After a comprehensive review of all digital evidence, including detailed time-stamped footage of the unauthorized road construction, numerous photographic records, and the heartfelt testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Lawson began, her voice steady and commanding. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by the HOA, specifically the construction of a road on private property without the owner's consent, were not the result of an innocent administrative error, but were a blatant abuse of power driven by personal agendas. Our community's rights as property owners are fundamental, and no one should have their land altered without their explicit permission. A heavy silence fell over the room as Lawson continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all decisions related to this unauthorized road. Furthermore, we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the policies and practices that allowed such an overreach. New guidelines will be implemented to ensure that every resident's right to control their own property is respected and upheld. Today's decision is not just about reversing an isolated act. It is a resounding declaration that Crescent Meadows will stand for justice, accountability, and the protection of individual rights. Her words struck a powerful chord, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. At that moment, a respected community advocate, a stalwart defender of property rights, rose to speak. "Today we stand united," he declared, his voice ringing with passion. "No resident should be forced to endure the tyranny of decisions made without their consent. Let this vote mark the turning point, a clear signal that our community values freedom and innovation over outdated bureaucratic control. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our rights is addressed with swift, decisive action." His impassioned words were met with thunderous applause, uniting the room in a collective call for reform. Following his address, a senior officer from the local planning department presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert assessments, and official documents that unequivocally demonstrated that the road was built without proper authorization. The dossier confirmed that the construction not only violated property rights, but also contravened local zoning regulations. The Internal Affairs panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures for those responsible, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Lawson concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Crescent Meadows, a community where every homeowner's rights are inviolable and where public authority is exercised with integrity and transparency. Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and ensure that no one can impose their will on our community without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, and we will not allow arbitrary overreach to dictate the future of our neighborhoods." Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for property rights. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Crescent Meadows. The days of unauthorized construction and arbitrary enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks following the historic vote, Crescent Meadows underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded decisions and the sweeping reforms enacted by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, igniting impassioned debates about property rights, community governance, and the importance of individual freedom. Editorials in the local newspaper, bearing headlines such as "A New Dawn for Crescent Meadows" and "Community United for Freedom," celebrated the decisive action taken to protect every resident's right to control their own property. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreHOBullying, and #OurLandOurRules trended widely, reinforcing the community's steadfast determination to stand against arbitrary rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw unprecedented attendance as residents gathered to share their own experiences and envision a future where personal creativity and freedom were celebrated rather than suppressed. Neighbors, who had long lived under the oppressive thumb of rigid HOA policies, now spoke proudly about their right to manage their own land without fear of punitive interference. "Our property is our legacy, and we will defend it against any encroachment," one impassioned resident declared at a packed meeting, his words echoing through the crowded hall. The atmosphere was one of hope and renewal, a promise that Crescent Meadows would always honor the individuality of its residents. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that every complaint was carefully reviewed and that no homeowner would ever again suffer from arbitrary fines or intrusive enforcement. Our duty is to protect the rights and freedoms of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed during a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to justice and integrity. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations mobilized further, organizing workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns designed to empower residents and encourage a culture of mutual respect. When we come together, our voices have the power to reshape our community for the better, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring residents to unite in the fight for a more equitable governance model. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was deeply personal and transformative. My decision to stand up against the HOA's unauthorized construction on my land and to fight back against the infringement on my property rights had not only reclaimed my farm's legacy, but had also ignited a broader movement for freedom and creativity in Crescent Meadows. Neighbors who had long suffered in silence now found their voices, sharing their own stories of resistance and standing in solidarity. The digital evidence that exposed the unauthorized road and the ensuing battle became a beacon of hope, a rallying cry for every resident who believed that property rights and individual freedom were inalienable. Karen Miller, once the formidable enforcer of the HOA's draconian policies, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community unites for justice. Her influence waned as digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the urgent need for reform and the dangers of unchecked power. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Crescent Meadows, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered beneath the gentle glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Our Land" was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches resonated with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate not only the restoration of our property rights, but the power of community when we stand together, Councilwoman Lawson proclaimed, her voice ringing with unwavering conviction. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to safeguard our freedoms and ensure that no one can impose their will on our community without accountability. As each new day dawned over Crescent Meadows, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how the HOA built a road on my farm without asking, and how the community rallied to reclaim our land, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of private property and the right to live freely. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Crescent Meadows, truth, justice, and individual freedom would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to defend our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Crescent Meadows would forever be a place where freedom, ingenuity, and respect for individual property were cherished above all else.